What happens if I change
There
the
we
view up in the
go.
corner
All right, we're live.
and in living color?
Awesome. I'm just going to put this on here.
Hola, Brandon.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Master the World. We're just going to give everyone a minute to get in here, and then we'll get started. Thanks so much for being here today. All right. Numbers are climbing. We're at 40, 45. I know we have over 100 people registered today, so we'll just give everybody a moment. Feel free, if you're already in here, to say hello. We would love to know who you are. Hi, Brandon. Hi, Becky. Hi, Jane. And just be mindful that if you're saying hello and you want everybody to see you, make sure that you're saying hello to panelists and attendees. So, hello, everyone. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Li-Ming Stroh. I am the co-founder and CEO of Master the World. So excited to have everyone here today. I have a number of speakers with us today, and I'm going to quickly introduce them, and then I'll go through some logistics before we get started. Again, welcome to everyone. This has been quite a journey for Evan and I want to introduce Evan Goldstein, my business partner. We've been working together. We were just counting for over 15 years. And full circle, the first company we started was started 13 years ago. So welcome, Evan. Do you want to say hello?
Hello, hello. That's
great.
Hello.
Great. And then we also have Madeline Triffon from Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Madeline, Master Sommelier and one of the best human beings around. I love talking to Madeline and love learning from her.
What a kind thing to say. Warm hellos to everyone from gorgeous Detroit.
Awesome. And then we also have Tim Gaiser. Every time I hear Tim talk, I feel like I'm learning another year of knowledge. So Tim, welcome. Tell us where you're coming from.
Rio Rancho, New Mexico, behind the Adobe curtain.
Awesome. Awesome. Great. We're going to get started here as people kind of dribble in. That's great. I'm just going to go quickly to my slides. And
hey, Joe Roberts.
Hey, Joe Roberts. Awesome. Evan, do you want to just give everybody a little primer before we start, since we have a lot of folks joining us for the first time today?
Yeah, sure. I'll take this. First and foremost, thank you all for being here with us today and taking the time live and in living color. As Li-Ming mentioned, one of the nice things about the way we do our webinars, which we do monthly now, roughly the same bat time, same bat channel each month, is that they are recorded. So you can either go back later if you simply want to enjoy the kit now, and then but do the tasting part afterwards should you have a kit, or you simply don't have time to do it today and you wanted to watch it later. But if you're with us here today, we really appreciate the live portion of it. Just a quick iteration, you can find a lot of this stuff on the website when you go there. And by the way, congrats Li-Ming on launching the new and exciting new website stuff today as well. But this, the biggest question I get these days is, Evan, how did you predict COVID? How did you know it was going to happen, and to have this wine tasting kit to be ready in the same right place at the right time and all of that? To which I chuckle and let people know that it took roughly 5.5 years from the aha moment to essentially our launch in January to get everything off the ground. But really, this sort of was developed initially as sort of an effort to help people who want to get their palates focused and trained, a vehicle to do that is portable and easy and regular, i.e. subscription based and all that. It was not specifically intended to train Jedi Knights, although we certainly have a lot of Luke Skywalkers in training, but also put together for people who are simply looking for help in improving and widening their tasting skills and platform, and do so for a way where they were not walking into, you know, the proverbial grocery store and hitting Phil Spector's wall of wine and trying to figure out what they should try, but that the wines could indeed be curated by people who knew what they were doing, and the wines selected being benchmarks and archetypal examples to show to everybody. They always come in the format that you have, 6 wines, 187 milliliters in a box, always accompanied with the online platform that many of you are using today. and always accompanied by this really cool webinar that I get to hang out with two of my favorite people and my business team. So back to you, Lee May.
Great. So again, a reminder, if you're tasting along, start tasting. If you haven't already tasted, you're going to feel like this is rapid fire. So don't feel bad if you're not caught up, if you will. And this is meant to be sort of a taste first and then drink along after. So if it's your first time and you didn't already taste, it's okay. Don't try to do the evaluation at the same time. You might really, it might really be a little too much. If you don't have the tasting kit, we want to remind you that we made this site to be free to all in terms of tuning in. So all the webinars are free. All the accounts are also free. You can buy the wines, or if you tune in without the wines, we will have a way for you to play along with the poll. So it'll be a learning process for you as well. And for those of you who are hearing all this again, because it's your 5th webinar, we thank you for having been here since webinar number 1 or the last 2. Whenever you've joined us. But it's really important for us to tell you that we appreciate the early adopters. We've taken the time to launch slowly, just like you would do a soft launch for a restaurant. This is our 7th kit, and we recognize that this is actually the first kit for a lot of you. So I'm gonna go through a few basics of how to look at this kit. For starters, if you don't know where your kit number is, it's on the box. And this is our 2nd iteration or 3rd iteration of the box with all these crazy words that Evan and I argue about whether or not it should be in our tool.
Thank you for laughing, Tim.
And Madeline and Tim too. You can also find the kit number on the bottle itself. So if you're not sure what kit you're on, and if you want to play along as the audience, just know that the kit number is 109. I'm going to show you guys the kit number. It's very hard to Zoom and be on a website at the same time. And our app isn't working yet, but our website is completely responsive on the phone. So on the phone, you can type in mtwwines.com and you should be able to get yourself to the website, log in for a free account, and where it says start tasting, you will be able to log in with 109A. So the kit number for today is 109A. And for those of you who are super competitive, we do have a leaderboard
Nobody.
today. Nobody here, I'm sure. Actually, Christian from Ohio has been always competitive from the very first webinar. Thank you, Christian, for that. Please join the leaderboard. All you have to do once you log in is to put CW72 as the leaderboard. Q&A, please ask away. We have a Q&A box on your Zoom. So if you ask those questions and put it in Q&A, not in chat, what will happen is after the entire webinar, we'll send out not only the recording, but also the Q&A file so that you'll have some of the questions that other people asked. There are no dumb questions. There are no stupid questions. Please don't think for a second that because you're talking to a bunch of guys who've been tasting wines a very long time, they're not learning. Everybody's learning here. All questions will be answered. If we don't get to them because you're a very big group today, we will share them afterwards. And the chat is definitely very useful. If you have a quick thought that you want to throw in, please do that. Full Circle and Master of the World are not built by just Evan and I. We have a lot of people behind us. And thankfully, Courtney and Andrea are going to be pulling any questions that are posed in chat into Q&A if you didn't put it in the right place. But do try to start by putting it in Q&A so that they can drink their wines as well. Now, we are going to have a poll as we go. Some of you might be thinking, why are you having a poll? I already know what the wine is. What we're asking for is your honesty. When you were tasting, what did you think it was? And that's going to be really helpful in helping us understand which twist and turn you took to get to this wine. So with that said, I'm the timekeeper. We are going to move on. Madeline Triffon is going to start on the very first wine.
Hello, everybody. Most importantly, I hope you're keeping healthy, cheerful, as lighthearted as possible. And in my book, as someone who has no children, parents are heroes as our teachers. So all the best to you and cheers. Limang, I simply want to reiterate what you shorthanded so brilliantly. You know, the whole game here is to taste in advance and then drink along if you, you know, get to that point. If you haven't, there's no wrong. That's very important. Also, you know, this is very useful for Jedi Knights in training, but it's really for everyone. My favorite word is focus. It makes you, you know, get out of the cocktail party mentality and learn how to listen to the wine closely. I usually ask the dumb question, so if you're thinking it, I'll pipe up. And God, it's wonderful that we're doing this, that you did a soft opening, because, you know, more restaurants should do that. I remember arguing with proprietors. So that said, I'm thrilled I'm doing number one. And you will notice that I've been tasting the wine in the background. I had first tasted it about an hour and a half ago. And I don't remember gridding it, but I was part of the team that did, I think. But I can't talk about wine unless it's real to me, you know, and I like to make it very real indeed. By the way, before I start on this wine, you will notice a lot of descriptives on here, and some people get intimidated by the quantity. Look at it as generosity. You know, you get to use our words before you, you know, decide down the road as you taste and tell us how wrong we are, right? And come to your conclusions using a different route. So look at it as helpful, but you don't have to get all of these by any means. So simply, we always look at the wine against a white surface, and this is indeed Star Bright. It is straw. I'm going to quickly go through everything, not every word, or not every one descriptive, just the ones that are striking me at this moment. It's got a little bit of a golden, it is straw verging on yellow, and it might even have a little bit of teeny little copper tinge. Just hold that thought. It's not overt, but it's an element. And it moves in the glass, you know, quickly, but it seems to have a little weight to it, which might speak to alcohol level. In terms of the fruit, and this particularly aromatically, and I have both tasted and smelled the wine, but boy, the fruit is almost explosive on the nose, and it contains all of the categories that are listed, citrus, stone, and tropical. Citrus fruit, certainly. Lemon and lime on the palate, a little bit of that Sweetmeyer lemon comes through, a little bit of zesty or peel bitterness to it. So hold that thought as well. Very forward on apple and pear, all sorts of apples, but particularly to me at this tasting, red and yellow, which isn't mentioned, but you know, there it is. Definitely fresh, definitely ripe. And then boom, right behind that, the stone fruit is just gorgeous. Nectarine, peach, again, fresh and ripe as well, but not, you know, candied or sweet by any means. But in terms of tropical fruit, onto the next page, there we go. What I'm getting, you know, at this tasting is more melon than anything else, and maybe even a little cantaloupe that isn't mentioned. So again, this is not a right or a wrong thing in terms of the descriptives, but the ones that we noticed at the time we were tasting. There's a gentle florality to this wine. It's not overt, it's definitely fresh. And I love the fact that we mentioned blossoms, you know, and honeysuckle maybe is a little more poignant. In terms of green vegetable and other vegetables, it's a minor subtle note, and you'll notice, you know, salad greens, celery root, radishes, those are pretty low tone things aromatically. Something that's not mentioned on here in terms of spices, I get a little ginger on the palate, but herbal, again, a little quiet, but lemongrass and chamomile. I think that covers it for me. There is a happy, not incorrect disconnect between the nose and the palate, in that the palate turns tart. So hold that thought as well, whereas the fruit is very forward on the nose. Organic earth, I didn't find any today. Inorganic, definitely. It is mid-palate and in the finish as well. You know when it's there and you know when it's not there, correct? And you know, we mentioned mineral rock, chalk limestone, but it's up to you how you'd like to describe inorganic earth at this particular sitting. Oak aging, enthusiastically not. If it's in there, boy, they sure fooled me. You know, nothing neutral, nothing. Oxidation nuttiness, I don't get too cerebral about this. My colleagues are more descriptive than I am. But I would say sort of sweeter examples of nuts, like cashew and pine nut. And then perceived winemaking choices, least contact. I mean, it smells fresh. It's got a little bit of a beery character to it. I would like to mention too, in terms of the mouthfeel, before we actually look at the structure, which is coming up, there's got some weight to it. And the acidity is definitely mouthwatering, but at the same time manages to be slightly, it's not poignant. So sometimes, you measure it, but you also qualify it. Shall we go on to structure, Li Meng?
Yep.
Is that okay with you? If either of my colleagues feel I haven't covered the subject, please pipe up. We're doing okay so far? Yay.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, everyone out there, their bar is very high. So I like living up to them and I like learning from them as well. So residual sugar, no, it's dry. I mean, it's intensely fruity. And for those of you who are frankly learning to taste, and I hope there are plenty of you out there, it's the age-old conundrum, what's fruity and what's sweet. A wine can be bone dry and intensely fruity at the same time. This is dry. Acidity, I would say it's not medium. At this tasting, it's medium plus, because the finish is mouth-watering, and actually something we didn't mention, there's a little bit of a salinity to it, that illusion of sea spray. Alcohol, at this tasting, to me, I would say medium plus, but not medium plus plus. I can feel it. It's not, indicative of anything other than possibly maybe a warm here, ripe finish. Phenolic, low to medium. I mean, I felt it a little bit on the palate. It's not a major element in this wine, but it's there. The texture of my palate has been changed, which could be indicative of skin contact. Texture, lean and tart in the finish, but again, mid-palate, quite lush. Finish, medium plus for sure. If anything, it swells. And the complexity, medium plus, this is not a highly complex wine, but it's certainly complete. Delicious. And I think that's all I'd like to say about it descriptively. Gentlemen, you want to pipe in at all? How did we do?
I think we're gonna go straight to the poll so that we have a bit more time. And I want to just introduce the poll to everyone. So this is the first poll, so we're gonna take a little bit of time. So we're gonna ask you guys to take a moment to poll based on what you've seen so far, what you think this is. So we're gonna ask you which grape variety, which region. So I'm gonna release the poll in a second. If everyone just takes a moment to quickly decide based on the descriptors, and if you have the wine, based on the wines that you have, just wine number one.
As you're thinking, just a quick ad here, you'll always get from us in these polls 3 options for grape and then the other. The other would be, I was thinking it was something that wasn't on there, in which case check that box, but also let us know in the Q&A what you might have thought it was, because that's something that's good for us to address, why you went down that path a little bit later. So you're always gonna get 3. Clearly one of them is right. And then we break it down into old world, new world, and give you a couple of choices within each of those 2 areas.
Yeah, you can feel free to put it in the chat as well if you just have like a burst of which varietal you thought it was or what region you thought it was. We have 50% of the people voted so far, so don't be shy, those of you. I'm gonna give you about 20 more seconds and then we're gonna switch to what we like to do on the webinar is say where everybody else was, not just the correct answer, so that we can learn from the wrong answers, if you will.
And this is completely anonymous, guys. So
very important. And just to remind you all, I can be staring at the label and going, there's no way it's that. So, be honest.
Okay, so I'm closing down on the poll and I can tell you guys what the results are of the poll, and then we can talk about whether people were close. Here are the results of the poll that I hope you're seeing. The Pinot Gris was 68% of the votes. Sauvignon Blanc, 18%, and then you've got Riesling and other. And Madeline and other, we're seeing people talk about, Chardonnay maybe? So maybe start there. Can you talk about how it's not Sauvignon Blanc, and
No, absolutely, and this is before the reveal, correct? Yes.
Yes.
Actually, kudos to whoever was true to themselves and put Chardonnay in other, because if you gave this to me blind, I would strongly consider it actually an unoaked Chardonnay. I think in terms of Sauvignon Blanc and Riesling, I'm gonna, the elephant in the room to me, if you're considering Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio, Chardonnay versus Sauvignon Blanc and Riesling, is it highly aromatic or not? Some grape varieties are you know, lightly aromatic, semi-aromatic. But Sauvignon Blanc and Riesling, if they don't, you know, if there's not a brass band playing when you put your nose in the glass, I would be disappointed. So again, no right or wrong thing, but hold that thought. And we are discussing both the aroma and the palate, and wines, you know, like cocktail party guests, don't always speak loudly at some parties. And sometimes a Sauvignon Blanc can be a little bit shy. Ditto Riesling.
Great. And we also had some Chenin and Albarino in here, and Chablis, which would work with your Chardonnay. And in terms of region, Italy versus France, should I reveal what it is, and then we'll go?
The only thing I would say, if I can jump in here, you know, just the broad stroke, Old World, New World. And by the way, quickly regarding the grape varieties, don't forget the structure, especially if you're really flummoxed. Sometimes the persistency and intensity of the acidity will speak volumes, the mouthfeel. Old World, New World, you know, is there some sort of minerality and or organic earth evident aromatically or in the flavor? You know, and absolutely some wines can be New World and display minerality. So it's not a in or out thing, but it is a question to ask. And it looks like at this tasting, Old World is dominating.
Great. All right. So I'm going to share my reveal.
Voila, Pinot Grigio 2018 from Colio. So bravo collective group. And Li Meng, should we talk to why it is what it is, right?
I'm going to let people ask some questions, and we have some questions that I want to definitely shoot out. I want to just address one thing. If you are in the tool and you're seeing a 2018, which is the correct answer, and a 2017 that is circled in orange, we do give partial credit if you're close. So 2017 is also an acceptable answer. With that, I'm going to first, I think, someone asked, Joe, thank you, Joe, for this question. How did you guys decide on this evaluation rubric? And is it linked to any specific exams or tracks of study, like the Court of Master Sommeliers or WSET? Evan, I'm just gonna ask you to take that one.
Sure. I would say that the rubric was was developed collectively across this team here and other people. If anything, it's probably closest to what the Court of Master Sommeliers has historically used. However, it's not exactly the same. Number one, just because, you know, this is not purely a training tool for Jedi Knights, but also we did want to incorporate other thoughts and other ways of doing things. Elements are weighted differently than both of those tests are, but the goal was eventually to provide an opportunity to help people grow. As we didn't actually point it out at the beginning, but I think it's worth pointing out now, when you do enter into the online tool, there are 2 tracks you can take. This is what we call the full workout track. So for those of you who are really looking at upping your game or validating what you know or trying to simply get better or whatever, this is a more focused track. The quick picks is more of what the old world or the old school, particularly in England or Australia, we would call the options game, which is essentially a selection of what grape do you think it is, what general region, what more specific region, and what year. So it doesn't get into all the depth, and it allows for people who want to have more fun with it, but not get caught up in all of the descriptors to put it together to still enjoy and play. But it was sort of a collective effort, and obviously focusing in on where we come from, but also incorporating other points of view.
Yeah, I have one question for you, Madeline, from Stacy. She said that she went the Chablis route and was wondering if there were key markers that she missed that was specifically not Chablis and this Pinot Grigio.
Again, broad stroke. And by the way, can I ask my first stupid question? What's
Please.
a rubric?
It's like a Rubik's Cube.
Oh, a rubric.
It's like our evaluation, yeah.
Thank
It's
you.
our evaluation.
Told you I was going to do it. Actually, that's a terrific question because, you know, I'd be struggling between, you know, Pinot Grigio and Chablis on this. I think the minerality would have been more apparent on the nose in Chablis. There would have been less overt fruitiness, which this has. And it wouldn't have had almost an illusion of sweetness on the palate from that ripe fruit. You know, Chablis is very linear to me. And however you want to define the minerality, that would have been more apparent and more of a tie-in between the nose and the palate. But I think, you know, also somebody did ask a question about phenols, and maybe we can pivot to Tim momentarily on that, but you just feel it almost like white wine tannin to me. It changes the texture of your palate. but not on the sides of your tongue, not in a tartness. Tim, before you take the phenol issue, you know, the big question to me is, so let's say you're playing with Pinot Grigio / Pinot Gris, same guy. Why not Alsace? Why not Oregon? Is you know, you should be in the happy place of struggling with that, right? So, you know, Alsace, richer, honeyed, sometimes almost an illusion of or actual sweetness, fuller, softer, weightier mouthfeel. And Oregon, you know, even maybe, I don't know if you could be much riper than this, but no evidence of minerality. I don't think with any regularity. You would probably struggle more with Oregon versus, you know, in this case, Collio, which is a, you know, A+ region for Pinot Grigio.
Or even New Zealand.
Yeah.
You tasted more of those than I have, because I haven't been there.
Yeah.
Great.
And Maddie, if I can just add a couple of comments
Please.
about the Chablis versus this. Chablis, by comparison, is going to have higher acid. To your point, much more pronounced minerality. Probably, you know, some telltale signs of malolactic, which are not here,
Right.
and an
No
absence
mallow
of
here.
phenolics. So phenols are big family of compounds. There's about 300 different compounds. Tannin is actually in that as a separate family. And phenols come from skins. And so this particular wine saw some brief skin contact, and it's really the sensation of bitterness on the finish of the wine. In here, I think on a scale of 1 to 10, it's probably about a 3.
Right.
And then if we compare this to Alsace, to Maddie's point, the alcohol in Alsace much richer, more often than not, botrytis, residual sugar, less acid, much more phenols, and much more of the color that you might see.
And what is Tim talking about? Structural elements. So those of you who are, you know, especially if you're tied in a little knot, go back to the structure. Yes. Acid, alcohol, you know, tannin, all that good stuff. How does it feel? You know, just slightly push the aromatics and the flavors out of the way. And sometimes it'll be like obvious to you. You'll go, son of a gun, there it is.
Great. All right, we're going to move to the next wine. I know we have more questions. Keep them coming. We'll answer them if we don't get to the end of the webinar. And I'm going to filter in some of these technical questions on how to use our tool as we go through. Evan, you're up. Wine number 2.
Yeah. This is an interesting wine, and one of the elements of these kits that I think you'll find to be both challenging but also invigorating at the same time is, as you move from one wine to the other, being able to look back on prior experience. So the juxtaposition of these two wines was at once conscious, but also educational in terms of what the wines are. So there's not, you know, they're not gargantuan differences, certainly in the appearance. This one probably doesn't have quite as much of a beige or toffee-ish hue, which probably has something to do a little bit of with the varietal, but also the richness does have something to do with perhaps other elements, winemaking, et cetera, that we can talk about later. But all those notes are pretty true to tack. I think it's important to point out, as Madeline was saying, that when these wines are tasted, when these wines are gridded, it is a Fuji snapshot in time. And wine, very much like us, changes on different days and things like that. And wines can be showing more, not so much sight per se or structurally, but certainly in the aromas, tastes, descriptors and things like that, based on, is it a fruit day or an earth day? But also as much is it how it's tasting, what it's like, et cetera, et cetera. So today I think this wine shows, again, generous citric elements there. There's a whole bunch of them carved out for you. Pretty much any one of them. We always, as Madeline said before, tend to be more generous, providing you more options than not. These are literally 5 different flavors that we found within it. You had 3 that you could pick from, and hopefully some of them crossed over there. Definitely a sense of freshness and ripeness within the fruit. And again, a little bit of both the flesh as well as sort of more the peel zest. Not so much pithy. There's not a lot of bitterness here, although there is definitely some of the more, the characters you get from the oils and such of the fruit. A little bit of tree fruit, similar types of tree fruit character to what we talked about before, the greenness in the orchards, as well as a little bit of quince, something like that, again, fresh and ripe. Bit of stone fruit here. And I think that's one that's both telling to the varietal, but also telling potentially the style and a little bit for the year. And once again, fresh in nature. So we can change to the next sheet. And oops, throwing my glasses around here, getting so excited. A little bit of tropicality here. I think that if you're thinking, you know, God, it's not as effuse as banana, but you ever had green banana or something that's more plantain-like? They don't tend to be quite as effusive. Starfruit, again, subtler. Melon, a little bit on the fresh side, not super ripe. Kiwi, fresh, not super ripe. Full of florality, once again, and again on the freshness side. I do find elements of other things there that are different, I think, and take you away from where the first one was. So I do get sort of that fennel seed, licoricey sort of thing that's there. White mushrooms, sort of that organic character. And Madeline mentioned ginger before. I think it's particularly prominent in the nose here. And again, all this sort of softer but brighter herbal characters. And there is this sort of note of like sesame or nutty or something like that, which is echoed in the oxidative nuttiness there, which I think is important both in terms of the style of this wine and in terms of the production of this wine as well. Clearly, although there's a little bit of mushroominess there, as subtle in the nose, this is really about inorganic earth. And again, as Madeline said before, if you want to call it minerals, you want to call it a little bit of that sort of sea spray, if you want to call it, you know, sesame we talked about earlier, you could sort of be lumping in that kind of there too. That's there. No crazy things going on, no animals. I do think there's perhaps some oak, but once again, if it is, it's not really the driving part of the personality, and it's obviously would be larger and probably older. Hence the used barric tomb. But I do think there's elements of nuttiness here, and that could be everything from the way the wine's made to other stuff there. Touch of oxidation consistent with that. Least contact for sure. Once again, both texturally as well as bringing out some of those flavors that we said before. And then lastly, as we get into the structure here, this is sort of like, I mean, the first wine was bright, but you come into this wine, this wine's really bright. You know, it's definitely in that sort of medium plus to high range, clearly dry, doesn't have the nature of ripeness that the first wine had there, so it's even drier. The first wine was obviously dry as well too. Alcohol's kind of medium-ish. There is some phenols here. They're lowish, definitely not screaming, but everyone's phenol meter is different. There's definitely a presence of some there, clearly on the lean and tart side, and very long. And I believe for this style of what they are trying to do, this is an awfully complex wine, especially when we talk about what it is later, you echo back to that, hold on to that thought.
Great. Okay, so we're going to run this poll as well here. Again, it's going to be a mix of variety and a mix of the regions. So let me launch this poll. You guys have about a minute. If you can take a minute, given everything that Evan has said in descriptors, for those of you who are tasting without wine, this is a good time for you to put all that tasting to the test. While people are filling out this poll, Evan, can you answer Jerry's question? He says, during deduction, how do I really use my description to pinpoint what the wine exactly is? Oftentimes my descriptors for all three wines become very similar, like a paint splattered descriptor. All wines have lemon, all wines have lime, apple, and white floral notes. Jerry, if I look animated and seem to be adding a lot of emotions into your words, I feel the same way.
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of it's going to start very clearly before you go into it on what part of the grape family is it. We have what we would call sort of very perfumed, very aromatic grapes, things like everything from Rieslings and Gewürzes and things like that just sort of bring it in one level. And then you have some that are, as Madeline said before, just a little bit shyer by nature, and are not necessarily expressive. So as I start pulling these together, I start pulling together, for lack of better words, communities, families, cohorts of grapes that I can then go look back on. And then I let those sort of so-called secondary elements come in, whether it be other elements of vegetables or other elements of spices and herbs that might suggest oaks or not, areas or not, grapes or not, and then try and pull them together. I think the danger zone when you're starting to deal with deduction is trying to find one or two things, hang your hot hat on it early, and then drive that deduction, drive that there and just sort of put blinders on like a racehorse and just sort of go to the goal thinking that's what the wine is. The whole idea of this is being objective and doing as much sleuthing as you possibly can along the way. You really want to be able to get to that if you've done all your work and it's Colonel Mustard in the conservatory with the candlestick, right? That's where you want to end up. But if you don't do all that work up front, your deductions will actually be useless.
I have to quote Tim. There is a part of you that is desperate to know what the wine is, right? Especially when you're in an exam situation. So part of it is learning to control your nerves, or if you're not nervous, that, that compelling desire to conclude. and just pull back from that slightly.
Evan, can we just say that that's a great movie, okay, and people should watch it, right? Okay, and we're talking about the movie Clue.
Absolutely.
Anyway, if I can add real quick, I can be Inigo Montoya and sum up. First of all, Jerry, you make a really great point that, you know, all wines, the fruit can be really similar, and fruit is the single most subjective thing there is. The things that you need to key on are three. One, the fruit quality, which ties to the structure and wherever the wine was, you know, the grapes are grown, wine was made, but also impact compounds, the important things. And this particular wine had several of them. And I think Evan will point on them once we talk about the reveal. So
Tim, can
Evan,
you
back to you.
define impact compound?
Yeah,
Can you
impact
define that?
compounds are a subset of probably 25 to 30 aromatics and flavor. Some of them have to do with wine chemistry, you know, chemical compounds like pyrazines in Sauvignon Blancs, or winemaking like carbonic maceration in Beaujolais. And there's a whole set, but those are things that professional tasters have to own.
This is where my whip cracking comes out. We're going to stay on schedule. So Evan, I'm going to ask you to look at the screen. I've shared the results of the poll with everybody. There is definitely a split here. Most people went the Albarino route, but some, I think a significant amount, 22% went the Sauvignon Blanc and then Chardonnay route. So you have your work cut out to distinguish between the three.
Yeah.
And as you explain this, when we do the review, I want you to think ahead on one question that Jeff has asked us. We get this question a lot. So why do we put certain wines, how do wines get selected into our kits? I think that's an important one to answer as we reveal that. So Evan, first question, Albarino, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, how do you do there?
Yeah, the varietals there, I mean, obviously there's a sort of 2-to-1 on the leading versus the second variety there. And I think for those of you who went the Albarino route, there are definitely convincing arguments, as they would say in the courts, as to why that makes sense. Sauvignon Blanc, from the structural standpoint, could work well there, especially with the acidity, but I would expect to get a either one of two directions, more sort of that greener, grassier, you know, olivey sort of nature of things, or be sort of more of that kind of lanolin-y, woolly sort of things, particularly if it was blended with Semillon or something like that. Not getting enough of those clues there personally. Chardonnay, certainly unoaked and bright styles could be that way, and in the sense of the way this wine is textured and all of that, not a bad argument as well. So you can go in different directions there. If you take it down to the geography, you know, if you're staying in that Albarino thing, although there are other parts of the New World doing it, and for those of you who actually picked that varietal and then went down to Uruguay, I'd say good on you, because to me, one of the most up and coming places for Albarino today is Uruguay, and specifically out to the east in Maldonado. But most of you are going to end up in Spain and Portugal. Spain generally wins on this one, although Portugal produces as much, and we'll learn about that more later. And there are, of course, people doing it in California. The Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnays are going to split there, although clearly if you're thinking Chardonnay, maybe you're not thinking as much Spain as the other places, not Portugal. Maybe that's where you went, California, but some good, interesting stuff to talk about.
If you haven't had one from Uruguay, you are not alone.
Okay, so
they're getting more and more available, so all right.
So I'm going to reveal the wine, and it is the Albarino from Anselmo Mendes Contacto, 2018 vintage. Evan, as you talk about this wine, talk a little bit more about how we choose what wines to put in here.
Yeah, so basically what we do is we sit down and we have flights. So imagine, if you will, a sort of a cross between picking wines for a wine list and a wine competition, in the sense that we put out a tender, if you will. We get in wines by category. In this case, it would have been Albarino or Alvarino. We get samples sent in to us. We get a lot more than we need. So I actually triage back with my suppliers to try and focus in on what we're doing. And then 3 master sommeliers, could be Madeline, Tim, and myself, or myself and a couple of others in a COVID world where not everyone's flying around so much. And we go through them. And rather than doing, for those of you who've judged competitions before, eliminate, retain, the first time we go through, and clearly if there's something wrong with the wine, it's not going to make it. But those that are there, we then have to ask ourselves, are these wines really good examples of what they say they are, grape-wise and regionally? If they are, those wines move from being thumbs up to being thumbs up and then gridded out. So we taste through and essentially take them against the online tool that you see there. And then we go back and we work with the wineries to make sure they want to be happily included and all that. So the wines are qualified. The wines are indeed curated. This is not, you know, a one size fits all and everybody who wants to be in is in, because if not, that's all we would be doing is tasting. So what do we got here? So this is an interesting wine. For those of you who were thinking Spain and Albarino, I don't discredit you. I think for a lot of people, they've got this sort of old sense that Albarino from Portugal means forced carbonation and residual sugar and cheap. And there's nothing further than the truth these days in quality Vinho Verde, quality Alvarinho coming from Portugal's north in the Minho area, and specifically Monção, where Anselmo Mendes owns the largest continuous parcel, the largest vineyard area there that he bought from Quinta de la Torre a few years ago. And this wine represents a step to the future. One, it's infinitely more complex and more interesting than a lot of Vinho Verdes are out there. And he does two things here. The name Contacto speaks to the fact that this wine has roughly 12 hours plus of skin contact there. That's going to pull out some of the phenolics that you might have got out before. That's going to darken the color a little bit more than what you might expect in a typical Albarino. And then there is, you know, there's some least contact here. So it actually comes out richer and more, for lack of a better word, Spanish in the way it presents itself there. Why? So you could say either, well, that's unfair, Evan. That's not what we were expecting. But also, this is about teaching. This is about education. And this is the direction that really high quality Alvarinho, whether it's Anselmo's wine, Soalero's wine, Quintas Arcas wine, Athos wine, all of these wines are going in this direction. So it's more of a modern day benchmark, but it's extremely well made. It shows exactly what quality Alvarinho in Monção and or Melgaço particularly are all about today, and is delish. And by the way, this is an area that's been known for wine since the 30s. So it's really a testable wine for those of you who want to be tested.
If you're throwing up your hands and going, my God, I didn't even know the grape variety, not to worry. And I'm going to give you my simple recognition of this wine was through the overt, and I'm talking about the variety as opposed to even the growing region, because Evan really took it to a very sophisticated level. It really not just smells, but tastes like flowers. You know, there's such an overt plurality to it. It's a beautiful expression of Alvarinho that didn't really, I couldn't tuck it into Ria Spicious, but I probably would have ended up there to make myself feel better.
The one thing for me, when I get more of the Spanish ones, I tend to get more of the stone fruits and things like that. And here you're getting more of the apple, quince, and citric element, which again speaks very typically there. I mean, there is definitely some, you know, some stone fruit here, but I think if I was in Spain, it would be bigger.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, you know, I've heard, you know, our friend and colleague Keith Goldstein once described Albarino as Villañeno's Riesling palate. So very floral, lots of terpenes, and higher acid.
Yeah. By the way, just a quick one before you move along. Albarino, the name, or Alvarinho, but Albarino, which most of us know it as, except for our good friends in Portugal, Alba means land, Rino means Rhine. So there was an original thought that there actually could be some genetic connection to Riesling at one point in time, because the personalities were in fact quite similar.
Yeah, I think it's important for everybody to know here, we're in the geek world. It is 1 o'clock Pacific when we started. We did this for a reason, because most people like us are wine professionals on this call. This kit isn't just for wine professionals. If you are a consumer and you've never had Albarino before, this is just going to open your world up. It's kind of a window on the world of wines, if you will. So with that said,
and I was just saying, it's our way of cutting through the clutter and selecting examples that if you're going to start putting this and hitting save and putting in your brain, these are the wines you should be using for reference points.
Hit save. I love that.
Save.
Tim, you're next. And I'm going to ask you to go through these two wines pretty quickly. The next two wines are with Tim Gaiser in New Mexico.
Hi, everybody. Hope you're keeping safe and well. Okay, so let's bring up the first slide on wine number 3. Everybody take wine number 3. Hopefully you've got a white background. I'm holding it, you know, over a paper, and I still don't have the first slide up.
Oh, sorry. It's on mine.
It's on mine.
It's on mine.
It's on mine.
Okay, I had to manually get rid of the poll. All right, here we go. So in terms of what it looks like, it's definitely star bright, reflects a lot of light in the glass and underneath. It's definitely clear. You know, very light concentration of color, definitely strong, and some green. And when I first opened the bottle, I had some bubbles, but they've dissipated now. Okay, so on the aroma, and this gets back to Jerry's question. So, you know, there's a lot of fruit here, and fruit being very subjective. The categories, I think you can dial in a lot more minutely. So here we've got mostly tart citrus, lemon and lime, maybe a little sweet citrus in terms of key lime. The condition is really underripe. It's very tart and it's very fresh. And mostly it's flesh and peel. There's some green apple underripe pear. And again, that is fresh and very tart. And then the stone fruit here, so we've got apricot, white nectarine, and white peach. And again, very underripe. So everything really is underripe. That points to a cool climate. That also points to the color, which is not much depth of color. Okay, please go on. And then finally, there is some tropical fruit here, but again, I would say it's all underripe again. And for me, it's underripe mango, a little bit of pineapple. That's about it. Now we've gotten beyond all the fruit. There's a lot of fruit, but I want you to push that all aside because really, for all of you who are the Jedi Knights in training, this is where it becomes important, what you're smelling. So here, the first thing it is, the wine's fairly floral. So when I smell for flowers, I take my nose out of the glass about half an inch. Yeah, and it's white flowers, mainly citrus blossom, but there's a little jasmine too, and they're very fresh flowers. From there, now we get to really what is the main event of the nose of the wine, and really the palate, and that's there's a lot of green botanical things. So first of all, I want to bring in the conversation that when I put my nose above the glass, it's actually fairly strong, almost as strong as the flowers as white pepper, okay? And beyond that, there's green botanical things. So there is, you know, I would say, you know, there's herbs, there is some radish, daikon, something along the line of lentils, parsley. So that, you know, there are things that are, you know, you might be tempted to say, well, that's maybe Sauvignon Blanc, but it's not pyrazine, so that's separate. This is very botanical, herbal / vegetal things. All right, moving to the right side of the page, there's really not much of organic earth, the soil, mushroom scale of that, but there is definitely a pronounced stony mineral. Petrichor is the fancy name for it. That's the smell of rainwater hitting the earth in a thunderstorm. And it's pretty pronounced. So it's very mineral driven. Animals, no, none near. Oak aging, no. Oxidation, no. This is very fresh, bright, and if we want to get fancy and geeky, it's very reductive winemaking, which means stainless steel, cold temperatures, and using sulfur, you know. And then the one thing I will add in terms of perceived winemaking choices, there's a little peanut shell least contact thing going on. Okay.
So Tim, as you're drinking for the last structure part, there was one question from the very beginning that asked about how to gauge alcohol, often getting stuck between this medium plus sort of situation.
Okay. Well, you know, I would have to, you know, that's a short question with a long answer. I would have to say the only thing I do personally is visually I see a scale and I match what I'm feeling internally to a scale. You know, there's low and high and there's increments. I don't know how my colleagues do it, but for me, everything internally is visual. So I don't know if that's much of a help. I've written about that and how you can install that kind of thing. Anyway, I would also say very practically on a day-to-day basis that you need to taste things and show extremes. So taste something that is low alcohol, like a Mosel Riesling versus a Central Coast Viognier, which is 15%. Because if you can find low and high, you can find the middle very quickly, and then you can go out to medium minus and medium plus. And I think that's an easy way to do it, okay? On the palate for this wine number 3, definitely dry. The acid to me is medium plus, but bordering on high. The alcohol is definitely medium. I mean, it's really struck right on medium. The phenols, I would go beyond. Today I'm tasting it is more like medium minus phenols. The texture, even though there's a lot of almost ripe fruit, it finishes really lean and tart and very laser focused and precise. Finish medium plus and complexity medium plus, I'd say. Okay, Leland, take it away.
I think this is an important one. Someone just asked, what is phenols? So can you explain what phenols is specifically?
Yeah, phenolics are chemical compounds, and they are found in grape skins. They're also found in vegetables and fruits, you know, and usually in the skins of everything I just talked about. So again, they're huge. There's 300 different phenol compounds, and tannins are part of that family. They taste bitter, okay? And they feel astringent in your mouth, okay?
Mm-hmm. Great.
All right.
So we're going to go to the poll next. Dun, dun, dun. Here's the poll. I'm going to start poll number 3. So everybody just has a bit of time to do the poll while I ask Tim a question. Tim, in the chat, someone mentioned maybe some smokiness. Did you get some smokiness on this at all?
No. No, and that's actually an interesting question. So it's from who? It's from
Joe, and I think Heather, maybe.
Okay. So I think, you know, anytime you think you smell a hint of something in your mind, make it extreme. You know, like if you think, oh, this may have some oak, then, and I'm not bashing any winery, but if you're tempted to think a white wine has oak, you think Rombauer, Chardonnay, right? So you think of something extreme, and internally you're going to know instantly if it's a yes or no. I don't get any smoke on this at all, though.
The only thing I would point out, and you mentioned it earlier, there is sort of a spiciness to this wine, sort of a caraway, peppery, whatever. And sometimes peppers, you know, there's something we associate perhaps more with Syrah than anything else, will by definition almost have, and I don't know chemically if they're similar, but sort of a for lack of a better word, smoky-ish kind of thing. So maybe that's a perception issue of how it's coming off to somebody, but clearly there's no smoke per se, smoke taint or anything like that I'm picking up in the wine, which would be far stronger, particularly in a white.
There's an exotic flavor to it, however you want to define it along those lines, that doesn't fit into the straightforward herbal, you know, fruit, oak, etc.
Yeah.
I just want to highlight one thing, guys. Sorry, just stepping in here for a quick second. Joe Roberts, you should not momentarily try to change your career because you got this wine wrong. I want to bring this up because, you know, we get wines wrong all the time. And oftentimes in our blind tastings, you know, it's so easy when you get to read a label, you know, and you are going to get wrong, you know,
we get wines wrong.
Anyone?
I mean,
yeah, exactly. So please don't change your career. You're an awesome writer. With that, I'm going to end the polling and share the results. And Tim, let's see what direction we should be talking about.
Okay. I want to tag onto what Evan said. He made a great point. But I also want to say, when I opened this, and I'm very sensitive to SO2, to me, I picked up a little bit of SO2 on the wine. And if you combine that with minerality at all, it smells smoky. Okay. And the other point is that if there was smoke taint in a wine, we would consider it flawed and we would never use it. So.
Thank you.
I just learned that. Thank you, Tim. So say that again, what you just said.
SO2, sulfur? You know, the Germans have a term for it. They called it Ferne, F-E-R-N-E. And that's this catch-all category that's mineral and sulfur and TDN all together. So.
And, you know, to what Tim said, not only do we pick quality wines when we do our pre-tasting, at the bottling line, when we rebottle these wines, we actually have at least 2 educated palates. I see Becky in the audience here. Becky's one of our educated palates that is actually tasting the wines beforehand. So every wine, depending on what kind of closure, you know, we have protocols for that, but every wine is tasted again at production before it's rebottled. All right.
By 2 people.
By 2 people.
One.
Thank you. Okay, so in terms of polls, we have Gruner leading the charge here, and Riesling and Pinot Blanc having some people voting that way. So Tim, you have a little bit of work cut out there. And I guess because it's Gruner, there is an overwhelming majority of Austrian supporters here, and then some France. So if you can explain in the context and quickly.
Sure. You know, okay, so this is a combination of what's there and then what's not there. You know, if we think this is Riesling, you know, all that green stuff and the white pepper goes away and the acid would be higher. Okay, so we're going to rule that out. And then the same thing for the Pinot Blanc, Pinot Bianco. I mean, that's, you know, a very neutral grape. In Pinot Blanc from Alsace, it can be very ripe, rich, very apple, a little bit phenolic, but it just doesn't have the pepper and radish and daikon and lentil and parsley and on and on and on. It just, and it doesn't have the acid either. So, yeah, I think that covers it.
Great. So I'm going to reveal this wine. It is, dun, dun, dun. Get rid of the poll. Sorry. It's the Laurens V Singing Grüne Veltliner 2018 vintage. So any questions on this particular one? Evan, I think it might be good for you to answer Elin McCoy's question, because obviously we're getting all geeky about all these details. When consumers buy the full package, do you have people explaining as you're doing in this seminar?
In the sense of, no, when you hit the reveal page on these, you'll notice that there's some basic descriptions on not only the winery and the wine, but more importantly, a couple of paragraphs up, clicks above, there is sort of a description as to what this grape or grapes or region is about and how it should help take you to where you get. Then as you go down, you have what you said and then what the panel of three masters said, so you can cross-reference the areas that you have, and hopefully if you didn't hoover down everything that was in your 187 bottle immediately, you could actually top it off. And in fact, for those of you who are tasting along with us right now, one of the exercises I strongly advocate for people is after the wines have been open for about 20 or so minutes, top them off and pop the wines all over again. It's almost like adding those 3 or 4 drops of distilled water into a good single malt scotch to really make it lift out and the flavors come out. But do it that way. There is going to be, for those people who need more than that, an opportunity to schedule, we're not quite there, but we're getting there, schedule coaching sessions with people like us who can then look at your results and go through them with you and help you figure out why you came up with what you came up with, or validate you when you're doing something right. So there will be an interactive element that is being built in coming down the road. But for right now, when you do hit the reveal page, there's at least a couple of paragraphs that hopefully help us get into your psyche and explain why this wine is the way it is.
Yeah, and if I could add, Elin, you know, for the folks out there who are not this geeked out on wine and just want to have a great time drinking, my father-in-law, for one, opens it on a Tuesday night and tells me he's having Chinese, and he opened wine number 2, and he's having a fun time guessing it. So I think that everybody takes what they want from the kit. They can just trust that it's a really good bottle of wine that they could trust a good selection on. With that, Tim, will you take us to the next wine, please?
Yes, happy to.
By the way, that wine was singing, as it said on the label. I thought so anyway.
Well, the other, and I even made my own chart from the website today. I don't know if you can see it. It's a quality pyramid. And the other selections they make are forbidden with residual sugar, friendly with mineral and spice, and then charming. And then the last one is called L5, and that actually is done in Barrique, which is, you know, kind of stuns the mind, Barrique and Grüne Veltliner, but there you are. Okay, wine number 4. And as they say on TV, now for something completely different. Okay, so everybody, as you hold the wine, there's definitely light reflected in the glass, not a great deal. Thicker skin grape variety. This is not Pinot Noir or Sangiovese or something like that. It's got some depth of color. I would say almost clear. To me, the depth of color, maybe it's just the light in the room, is medium plus. It is a deeper ruby red with a lighter ruby red. Very youthful appearance, and yeah, medium staining of the tears, and the tears in terms of what it looks like for alcohol content, probably medium plus, certainly not high. Okay, on the nose, everybody. So, I mean, thinking in categories of fruit, predominantly red, which is very interesting for a red wine with this depth of color. I would expect darker fruit to be dominant. Here it's not, it's red fruit. So we've got red cherry, cranberry, red raspberry, red plum, things like that. They are fresh and ripe. No blueberries. I wouldn't expect to find that in a wine of this color. Some dark fruit too. So black cherry, plum, berry, even cassis. Again, fresh and ripe. No citrus fruit and no stone fruit. And next slide, please.
Yep, it's coming.
Thank you, Lee. Okay. All right. So, you know, something that people don't think about, but again, red wines more often than not are floral. And this wine is I think, violet, a little bit of lavender, but for me, you know, a lot of fresh violets. And then now we're past all the fruits. I want you to park that, because as with wine number 3, the Grüne Veltliner, here, the non-fruit, before we get to considering even if there's any earth, is important. Remember the impact compounds I was talking about? Here, okay? And here, the wine is very green. So I've got a combination of tart red fruit with some darker fruit, but the wine is green. So there's a lot of green character to it. And by that, I mean, I'm talking about things like green bell pepper, Laurel bay leaf reminds me of California laurel. Basil, fresh basil, a little bit of mentriness. I like the tea leaf bergamot call in terms of Earl Grey tea. Other spices, little black licorice. For me, not the black pepper on this particular wine. All right, so we've got a lot of green elements. Please keep those in mind. Those are important. Going on to the earth, to me, there's not much of it all. So I don't get mushroom or soil, and really no mineral at all. So fruit dominant, green character. Oak aging, absolutely. Yeah, Li Meng.
Oh, sorry. There's a question here from Jerry, and I kept it till now because you are the technical sort of, I think the brain expert, if I can say so. Jerry says he does really well on fruit characteristics, and you've kind of hit really hard here on the secondary characteristics. And I was waiting to a red wine. What is the best way to improve on vegetal and earthy, and learning to recognize these sort of secondary characteristics?
Well, once again, a short question with a long answer. So, first of all, you should, Jerry, I'm sorry to say this, but fruit ultimately not that important unless it's specific characteristics of fruit. So you smell the fruit and great, and then put it out of the way and ask what else is there. And then you really need a checklist, which is, why every exam track organization like the WSET and the court uses a tasting grid, because there are things, and literally internally you see that as a checklist, and you go down it and it's asking yes or no question. Is the wine herbal? No. If it's yes, then you have to describe it. And then the other part of your question is, how do you improve your memory? And that is a really long answer. So Li Meng, we don't have time.
Yeah, we don't have
That's
time.
something maybe that if you can ping me after the fact, I can write some ideas for it. Okay.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Of course. All right. So where were we? Oak aging. Yes. Okay. And I would just say, yeah, absolutely. There is some oxidative elements like walnut, like pecan, but also smoked toast, light spice, vanilla, things like that. So we've got, a mixed regimen of oak aging here, some of it new, some of it used, but also I'm getting a mixed type of oak. So some of it is more smoke and toast, which could be French, versus other kinds more spicy. So who knows? All right, on the palate. All right, so the wine is definitely dry. I'm checking the salivary glands, medium plus acid. Yeah, they're working. Alcohol, today feels it's right on the edge of being high, but it's medium plus, okay? Tannin, medium plus at best. In fact, it's, to me, a weak medium plus. And again, to Evan's point, he said this, and so did Madeline, these wines change day to day, and frankly, our perception and our tolerances of structure changes day to day too. I would agree the texture is smooth and round, and the finish is medium plus, and complexity, I would say, is medium plus. Okay.
Great. All right. So we're going to do the poll.
Yeah.
Great.
While you're doing that, Li Meng, can I just pipe up about one thing? It's a PS to Tim's comments. Those of you who don't see some sort of a scale when it comes to alcohol, because I don't, I pay attention to whether I can feel it or not. And frankly, if it's perfectly balanced, I don't. When it starts to pull my attention a little in my chest, I'll notice that. Also, that wonderful question about how do you perceive other elements like herbs or what have you. You have to practice this this cool skill set of perceiving something and then just gently shoving it aside, so you can then perceive the less dominant elements. Thank you for letting me pipe up while you were running the poll.
I'm just going to jump in quickly and add one more thing on to that. I said those are two really good points. Number one, Madeline's point is well taken. Not only do you have the weight and the body factor, which goes, as Tim said, once you understand the extremes, you can work the middle. But think about it, I know it's tried and true and everyone says it all the time, but milk products are really good. What would the analogous thing here? Is this non-fat milk? Is this cream? Is this 1%? Is it 2%? Because literally dairy fat in dairy is what alcohol is to wine. The more dairy fat you have, the more you get towards cream. The less, when you spin it all out, it becomes non-fat milk. So think about that as a good way to do it. And as Madeline said, if a wine's got alcohol in it, for those of us who are old enough to remember Vicks Vapor Rub that they used to rub all over your chest to clear you out, you get the Vicks Vapor Rub factor, it's a higher alcohol wine. And then lastly, hard to do in COVID times for the vegetables, but if you do have a really ample spice cabinet at home, which I do, take a day. just literally open the jars, smell them, think about them, put them down, and try and start making some of those connections so that those flavors become more second nature and actually tend to pop out in wine. Obviously dissolved in a solution as opposed to a powdered version of it or whatever, but I actually find that to be really helpful.
Great. So I'm going to end the poll right now and share the results. We have an overwhelming number of people going Cabernet Franc / blend. And at this point, I want Evan to think about an answer for Jeff, because this is a really good question. And Jeff, I can tell you that we agonized over single varietal versus blends a lot. So the question is whether or not we select only single varietals, or do we also throw in blends? But here we see that Cabernet is dominant as an answer, and then Cabernet Franc, and then Malbec and Merlot, Tim, are quick after. And there's quite an even split between Old World France and New World Washington. So how do we distinguish that? Do you want me to reveal first, or?
No. Let's talk about those. Okay, so very quickly, I'm glad everybody went to Cabernet Franc. You know, in the grand scheme of the Cabernet family, pyrazines, you know, the green bell pepper factor. I mean, that's naturally, chemically in those grapes. And unless you get the grapes really ripe, like Napa Cabernet, it really doesn't, you really don't get it, okay? So Cabernet Franc, yes, it's very pyrazinic. In fact, if you miss the pyrazines, the bell pepper, etc., I have a quick fix for you. And that the next time you mask up and go to the store, buy a green bell pepper. And then put it in a bowl and put it in your refrigerator. And then leave it. And then after about a week, it's going to start to melt and decompose. But every time you open the refrigerator door, you're going to be assaulted by pyrazines. At some point, your brain's going to reach threshold, and you're going to get completely grossed out. And then you're going to take it outside and throw it away. Don't throw it away inside. And from then on, you'll be able to detect pyrazines in the next county. Okay?
How useful and disgusting at the same time.
Okay. I know your roommates and your family will love you. Okay. All right. So, you know, Cabernet Franc and pyrazines, Malbec, purple in color, you know, thicker skin and just a lot of pigmentation. And Malbec, in terms of Cabernet family, has the least pyrazines. Oh, you know, not a lot. Okay. Unless it's high altitude. Okay. Merlot blend. And, you know, to me, this, you know, needs more fruit, softer tannins. And Merlot can be pyrazinic, but it's just softer and rounder. All right. So the region. So, all you kids out there that went to France, it's not earthy. It's not. Okay, how many people cheated and smelled wine number 5? If you didn't, pick it up and smell it, and it's really earthy. And then come back to wine number 4 and smell it and go, oh, it's really not earthy at all. Okay, so you can't go to the France with this. And also, if you were Cabernet Franc in France, you were in the Loire with Chinon, Bourgogne, things like that, and the wine is just not acidic enough or chalky enough or stemmy enough. Because more often than not, those wines are made with stems and whole clusters.
Did you say acidic or did you say Hasidic?
Acidic.
Okay, sorry.
All right. So I'm going to stop sharing the poll. And, okay. Sorry. Here we go. And the wine is Walla Walla from Columbia Valley, a Cabernet Franc 2016 vintage. This I thought was a brilliant wine, and I believe the winery might be on. So say hello if you are.
You know, I've really enjoyed this wine because, you know, especially Cabernet Franc in Napa Valley, it's too ripe and it tastes like Cabernet. It's, you know, a little bit lighter. And this is spot on for the variety, and it's really balanced and well.
Really, kudos. I mean, aromatically especially, memorize that nose, folks.
Yeah.
Tim, this is a very important question because you went hard on that pyrazines and green pepper. So why not Chile with all of those green pepper notes?
Well, you know, for me, red fruited, there's, Chilean Cabernet Franc, first of all, I think the alcohol would be less, probably 13.5%. And it would even be more green. Here, to me, the combination of the ripe of the fruit and also lack of earthiness and the degree of pyrazines, you know, I thought, and to me, there was a dusty quality. That's Washington State. So,
yep.
Good question, though.
Evan and Maddie, I'm going to just tell you this. You guys hate it when I do this. You have 10 minutes apiece. If you can take
No
less,
worries.
even better. But what we'll do is we'll go forward on the last two wines because to be fair to everybody who booked an hour and a half for our tasting, we're going to end all 6 wines on time. But if everybody doesn't mind, we'll stay on to answer any additional questions if you guys have any.
Yep.
So Evan, I believe you're next.
Yeah, and while you're bringing that slide up, I just want to go back to the gentleman who asked the question about do we do pure varietals versus blends. The answer is yes and yes. So there are going to be times when a wine is a pure varietal. This is a pure Cabernet Franc, I believe, for example. But there are going to be times where, you know, if you're, let's say you were in France, and let's say you were on the right bank of Bordeaux, and Cabernet Franc was a player here, but there was also Merlot, and there might even be, you know, a couple of other players to be named later, or in Rhone blends or in Spanish blends where Tempranillo or Syrah may drive it. So we always, when we know that you're oftentimes going to get wines that are assemblaged or cuvées, if you will, we will always put the driving varietal first because that could be, that variety could be absolutely pure, but we will always put it slash for a blend so we're not adding 14,000 choices, but also being true to the fact that it could be a Cabernet Franc driven blend or a pure Cabernet Franc in this particular case. So there we go. Now, as far as this wine goes, I'm going to spend less time going through the notes because you all can read, you're pretty good at it, and more time talking about the wines. So I think the appearance stuff, I don't really want to spend a lot of time here, just as we tell people in their studies not to spend way too much time here, but let's go to the fruit. And to me, this is a wonderful combination of red and black fruit, once again, with, to me, having it probably the reds driving a little bit more today than it was in the past. Once again, snapshot in time. I think I remember tasting this wine and it was more black to me last time. The fruit character here is definitely ripe. I would probably not go as far as saying it was like baked or whatever, but I certainly understand that. No blue fruit. And then again, this sort of wonderful pastiche, if you will, of other black fruit flavors, but they tend to be more on the ripe and the fresher side, whereas the red fruits are more dominant and a little bit riper. No citrus fruits. Occasionally you can, particularly in the case of, say, I don't know, Pinot Noir or something, find tangerines and orange peels and things like that, or a little bit of stone fruit as well too, but not happening here today. As far as the next parts of the nose, this is where I think you're going to kind of, as Tim always said, go into those impact components, go into those other flavors and see what's going on here. There's a bit of floral here, perhaps a little bit more rosy than anything else, but here's where I'm starting to pick up other elements. There's definitely that sort of combination of leafier, greenier, non-fruit elements that I sort of throw in that catch-all of dark leafy greens. Definitely some mushroomy things, some olivey things, beetroot as opposed to the beet vegetable, root being a lot more savory than sweet, but elements of that there. A little bit of what they sort of catch-all in parts of the world is sort of that Garrigue, Herbe de Provence thing, Fauchot, a little bit of bay leaves as well too, and then definitely getting other things. I'm getting a lot of black licorice, I'm getting a lot of black pepper, a kiss of pimenton, for those of you who are getting echoes of pepper, both black and a little bit of white. Some earthy components, both organic and inorganic. And then for those of you who've been scratching your head going, what the hell do they mean by animals? I'm not finding giraffes and zebras and walruses and polar bears. They're
Pandas.
definitely, yeah, and pandas or anything else. But certain wines may have what we'd sort of call it like a meaty character or a leathery hide-ish character or an iodine character or something like that. And all the sanguine characters, those are all fitting into the critter part. So if critters are there, you'll find them and they'll be probably obvious to you. If critters aren't there, it's a little bit like earthiness. Sometimes I think we all struggle way too hard to find earth. I always tell people that earth is a lot like pregnancy. You can't be kind of pregnant. You can't be kind of earthy. You're either pregnant or you're not. Wines are either earthy or they're not. If you have to struggle too hard, it's probably not there. The intensity of oak here is blended. I definitely, it's low on the impact scale and clearly shows some pedigree, but blended out so it's not overly dominated. I think the wine's clean, bright, suggests to me the use of some stems, some whole clusters, and as part of the style of what this wine is. Then in the mouth,
Evan,
but
sorry,
yeah.
one quick interruption. We're getting some folks on the chat saying that it's bready maybe, and there's spunk on the nose. So what would you define that to be?
Yeah, funk and rusticity kind of fit a little bit into that sort of animal and winemaker choices things. What's interesting to say here is that for many of these things, whether it's Brettanomyces or some volatile acidity or other elements, It really depends on your threshold. Everybody's threshold is different for this. So some people's Brett threshold is really high. So they might not even pick it up at all. Some people might, you know, it's kind of like Princess and the Pea. It's just a little bit of it. It's like, oh, the wine's bad, it's flawed, it's whatever. When I see combinations of these sort of elements there, I sort of lap them or lob them rather in the general catch-all of what I call rustic. And rustic, more traditional, minimal intervention, etc., speaks to a philosophy. It also speaks in general to certain parts of the world versus others. And that's a good point to be brought out, held in your little catch-all box before you try and go into your deductions. Good question.
Great.
All right, wine is dry, clearly bone dry. In fact, it's dry enough that there's an astringent character starting to dry the mouth out a little bit. So very much in contrast to the wine that we just came off of, which had sort of a sweetness and a roundness and a ripeness to it. Acidity here is sort of medium plus pushing. There's definitely some brightness here. Something we don't always talk about is acid with red fruit, particularly outside of the gamut of, say, Pinot Noirs or Barberas. But this wine has some acid in an obviously riper style of wine. Definitely a good amount of alcohol, but not excessive. You know, it's medium plus for sure. Tannins are present, definitely pulling at the sides of my mouth and echoing that sort of astringent character we talked before. A little bit gritty in texture, which you usually anticipate with those tannins and the astringency. Pretty long on the finish, and very, very complex. And when I say complex here, it doesn't necessarily mean better. It just means there's a lot of stuff going on there. And I think that's a term that's worth explaining to people, is that when you don't have to describe complexity and high quality. Usually they go hand in hand, but not always. A wine can be super complex and not your style. It's important to recognize that on a personal basis.
Great. So I'm going to launch the poll right now. So take a moment, everyone, to do this poll. Evan, while we're polling, here's another question. Jerry's asking lots of good questions today. What's the difference between large neutral and blended oak? And Jerry, we ask ourselves that question almost every single tasting.
Yeah, large neutral would be people who are using more casks and big foudres and things like that, where the surface area to wine is such that even though the older it gets, the less and less impact it has. It has less impact to begin with, simply because of the surface area volume of wine to the totality of wine. So that's what we say when we say large, and large neutral would probably mean not only large, but they're also older. Blended would probably be a combination of either A, larger oak with smaller oak, or older oak with newer oak, so that you're getting clues that suggest the presence of oak there, but not so dominant that you feel like you're chewing on toothpicks or eating a 2x4.
Great. So ending the poll, we have Grenache as a number 2 behind Syrah as a number 1.
Okay,
and
I'm not seeing my poll.
Oh, sorry. That was just me seeing it. Now you see it. Okay, so Syrah blend as number 1, 64%, and then 25% of folks going with the Grenache area. So the difference between Grenache and Syrah, Evan.
Yeah.
And then France, I think France pretty much is winning out this one at 78%.
Yeah, so I think the big thing between the Syrah blend and the Grenache blend is that Grenache tends to be twofold. Number one, much more generous and much rounder, juicier, sweeter, riper. This wine definitely has more austerity to it, leanness, architecture, backbone, and all of those, which you would associate more with Syrah. And that's not to say Syrah, in many cases, can't be blended with Grenache, and Grenache can't be blended with Syrah, but here is what would be the dominant. It seems that most people did think it was Syrah driven. In terms of France versus Italy, clearly I think those people who stepped in the old world, which if you add the two of those up, that's gosh, that's 89% of you picked right. And a lot of it is the rusticity, a lot of that is the style, a lot of that is the approach, the nature of the earthiness and the minerality that's there, the leanness of alcohol, and the grittiness and astringency of those tannins are definitely more old world clues than they are new world clues.
Great. Okay, so we're going to reveal this.
Yeah, I want to say Madeline some time on that last wine. So, we are in the Rhone. We are in the northern Rhone, and this is a lovely, pure 100% Syrah from Creux Hermitage, made by the venerable house of Gigal. What I think is wonderful about this is a couple of fold. Number one, and what's interesting is that it didn't speak to me as much today, but historically, I've had this wine a couple times. I remember tasting it and finishing finishing the bottle after the tasting was done. And there was much more of that sort of classic kind of bacon fat and meat and all of that today. The meat was there. We clearly pointed it out earlier, but as it sits open in the glass, I think it's coming out more and more. What's great about this to me is, first of all, it's Northern Rhone that you can afford. The prices, as we know, of Hermitage and Côte-Rôtie, even Saint-Joseph and Cornas, are going through the roof. Crozes Hermitage, by virtue of its size and its girth, are keeping the prices relatively modest, and people are interpreting it with much more seriousness, very much the way Burgundians have gone into the Chalonnais and then the Mâconnais and are bringing the quality up. I think you're seeing that here as well too. Crozes Hermitage used to be called poor man's Hermitage, and I think if you have the good ones today, which I would call this one spot on, it shows you as to why that is the case.
You know, one thing deductively, especially for the folks who were wrestling with Grenache versus Syrah, because they do, you know, there is commonality between the two, that, you know, and again, going back, tying this in to meaty, is it bready? Is it, you know, horsey? Or is it more Jimmy Dean sausagey, smoked meat? You know, when you, Grenache just doesn't have that in an overt way. And this wasn't obvious on it aromatically, but that flavor of, you know, smoked meat is on the palate. It's a second or third note, but it's distinctly in there. And that's why it's useful to be able to sort of practice moving some of the other characteristics out of the way and clearly perceiving even a subtle element, and also the distinction between the two kinds of animal, as the French would say.
Mm-hmm. We do have a question here, Evan. Given, I think a lot of folks have been up and down on their deductions, do we ever throw any curveballs in the kit? Do we throw an earthy New World wine and a fruit-driven Old World wine?
We very well could and might. You know, for us as we're going through it, it's just a good example. I think it's important for people to sort of take their hat off of their preconceived notion that this is exclusively for Jedi Knights and use it for the point. We just want to show people what's going on out there in the world today. And very much along the lines of what I said, you know, this Alvarinho, wine number 2 that we had before, which by the way, if you haven't gone back to it and tasted it recently, it's worth going back to. Is the fact that we want to show you what's happening in the world of wine too. So the way wines are being interpreted, and we could have shown, I don't know, you know, Petaluma Gap or a Cool Climate Syrah from California, and exhibited a lot of those similar traits to what we thought here. This one happens to be Northern Rhone, but we will definitely get into stages and thought processes with wines where they're selected simply because they're dynamite examples of where they are, and whether or not you would quote unquote be tested on it to not is frankly irrelevant.
Yeah, great. Madeline, I'm going to have you go on to the next one. And if there are any questions that are not answered, don't worry. We will answer them after 2:30 if you're able to stay on. If not, we'll send you an email with your questions answered. And with that, Madeline, if you could take on the last one.
I will be happy to, but I'm going to speak to the Navy SEALs, not to the Jedi Knights out there, because, you know, I've always wanted to be a Navy SEAL and can't handle a lightsaber. Alrighty then. So we are looking at, you know, we don't spend time on the appearance, but we spend, you know, we're very clear in looking at it. This is opaque. You cannot see through it. It's as dark as ruby gets. And then it doesn't lighten up until the very rim, which is also ruby, but I would hazard to say a little bit of violet in there also. So what? Simple. Think simply. This has got to be a thick skin variety, and it's got significant amount of extract. And there is absolutely some staining to the tears. It's not painting the glass, but it's staining it, it's changing it. And both aromatically, ooh, it just changed on me. I love it. It's like, you know, talking to your best friend after 10 years and you go, whoa, where did that come from? And so what we've got is a combination of red, blue, and black fruit on this. Again, you know how Evan was saying, pull out all your herbs, you know, pull out or go buy a bunch of jam to get a clear sensation of defining blue, which is blueberry for all practical purposes, black, blackberry, and red raspberry, cherry, strawberry. To me, it's a combination of them. All of them are ripe, verging on jammy, but not cooked. You know, they're beautifully, perfectly ripe, not verging on overripe. They're just, you know, they're very hedonistic in that respect. And I will say, and hold this thought, on the palate when you get to it, if you're considering, well, what dominates? This, to me, it finishes with black fruit. Though actually aromatically, the red fruit dominates, and also the oak, which we haven't gone to. On this particular grid, it's mentioning dried fruit like prune. I don't see it. You know, at this tasting, I just see perfectly ripe, slightly jammy mix of fruit with black finishing. We'll go to the next slide. I love the fact that our reds are showing florality. I mean, this has such a pretty smell of, you know, fresh flowers, not dried. And this is something worth playing with. We're not being too geeky, too esoteric on this. There's a very distinctive difference between the fragrance of potpourri and a freshly picked flower. But this is, you know, rose is a really dominant smell. This is more sort of gentle, quiet, violet with a little bit of lavender. I think if we go on to other elements that are secondary, AKA to me, not dominant, but important in this wine, then we have expressions of green, both in vegetables and herbs. And for me, you get a little bit of fennel anise. Go on down to the herbal characteristic. In terms of peppers, I don't get a strong, there's a little bit of a green pepper element to this, but it's not dominant. Herbal, however, not so much eucalyptus but mint. And it adds to the impression of actually of alcohol, which if you've tasted the wine, you know it's got a healthy dollop of alcohol to it, but it works just great and it gives the wine mouthfeel. Tobacco leaf for sure. And then down to other spices, I had to look up sarsaparilla. Root beer, yay. Maybe a little bit, but black licorice for sure. And that kind of ties into anise as well. And then cocoa powder, but that to me personally is more of an expression of oak. Then we go on to the earth elements. You know, I think absolutely sort of dusty, turned dirt character, clay. You know, maybe a little bit of inorganic, but it's not really strong. I mean, I don't get a sense of graphite or something like that, which I might be, you know, my brain, which I keep a very tight rein on, would want to look for in a wine that looks like this. Animal, you know, either Brett or, you know, smoked meat, nada for me in this, neither good nor bad, it's just not there. I will say both, especially aromatically, there's a beautiful, complete simplicity to this wine, and I mean it in the best possible way that follows through on the palate. It's very round and balanced. There is a significant amount of oak. To me, it's more medium plus on this tasting, but in no way detracts from the quality or the intensity of fruit, you know, you name it. I mean, to me, it's sort of chocolate, cocoa, sweet baking spices, very classic expression of new high quality oak, probably dominantly French. Don't have to worry about the next three categories. I find this wine extremely pleasurable. It really delivers. And it's a little difficult to pick out components because the fruit is so primal and pretty. Let's look at the structure. Definitely bone dry. Acidity, it's not deficient at all. It's medium plus. I wouldn't call it high, but again, really good to practice, those of you who are learning to taste the difference in mouthfeel between acid and tannin. It may sound silly, but it's not, you know, because they play off against each other and can elevate each other. Alcohol is, you know, medium plus plus. Maybe some of you sensitive to alcohol would call it high, but it works in this wine. High is not bad. It just is, and it reflects the growing region and or the year. Tannin, now this is a tell to me on this wine. The tannin is probably more medium plus if I were to quantify it, but quality-wise, it's edgy, it's drying, it's a little hard, and I'm paying attention to that. And I'm adding that to the fact that I think it finishes with black fruit. Round, smooth, which is not, you know, counteracting the mention of drying tannins. The impression is of a balanced, complete wine that finishes smooth. It does not finish austere. Yeah.
Great. And so I'm going to start the poll and just quickly do this poll. Here we go. For those of you who are in the room and listen to everything, Madeline, there were some comments here about that alcohol that you just mentioned. It's a 14.5% alcohol,
Yes.
you know, on the label.
Mhm.
And so if someone's having difficulty in getting past the alcohol, you know, what strategy do you give folks?
Well, first of all, don't get tied up in the numbers. I mean, it's good to take a look at them, you know, but frankly, sometimes you know, you line up 3 wines that are apples to apples and they all say 14.5, and one of them you can't get past the alcohol, and another one, it's absolutely a side note. In this particular case, the alcohol doesn't command my attention at all. You know, I can feel it clearly in my chest. Tim's, you know, scale is probably going towards the outer edge of it. But I would say, you know, you just get in the habit on all the structural elements, and this is true for acidity too, and tannin and alcohol. You perceive them clearly independent of all the other elements. You learn to isolate them and then quantify and qualify them. That may sound a little bit, you know, cosmic, but it's just a matter of practice. I think it's a skill set.
Great.
I really do.
I'm going to end the polling right now and share the results with everyone. So overwhelmingly, Cabernet Sauvignon blend, but we do have some Merlot blends. So the difference between Cabernet Sauvignon and Carmenere did get some votes as well, 15% on that. And then because I think of the Cabernet and the, I'm seeing that there is a overwhelming New World between 68% and 27% added together. It's New World California or New World Chile.
A significant amount of Chile there.
Absolutely. So where would you go with this?
You know, the one thing I will say, all of us, you know, if we're sitting there thanking the gods if we can identify it as Bordelais, you know, I mean, meaning it's a Bordeaux variety or varieties. And we've dealt with this before, you know, Cabernet Franc before, and then Malbec's in the blend here, Carmenere, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot. I mean, they are the same, only different, correct? So I think it's important to have a clear idea of what the fingerprints are, not just classically, but your own fingerprints. Remember I said that I thought that the black fruit finished, that was, you know, the caboose on the wine, even though it led with a lot of red fruit that might lead me down to Merlot or a blend. Carmenere, I think, would have a lot more sort of earthy, and to use that beautifully technical term, funk, to it than Merlot or Cabernet Sauvignon.
I'm going to reveal it because we are at time. And again,
yes, okay.
We are going to stay behind for anyone who has additional questions and can stay. But the reveal is this. It is Trick Point Cabernet Sauvignon from Alexander Valley here in California. So very exciting wine. Madeline, you know, no surprise there.
No surprise at all. First of all, it's made by a brilliant winemaker who you should go online for fun and look at his bio. He's making consulting for 16 wineries in 6 countries, in addition to having his own Sonoma winery where he specializes in single site wines of this quality. Nick Goldschmidt, who I believe is keeping us company tonight. And if you meet him, he is cozy and hides in plain sight. You know, he's a funny, chummy guy who's brilliant. I would say why Sonoma and not Bordeaux on this is important. You know, why is this not left bank Bordeaux, and why is this Sonoma versus Napa? I asked my friend Tim before we went live, and we agree. You know, the tannins on Napa would be more compelling. I think, to me, why not Bordeaux? You know, the expression of forest floor is just not really strong on this for me. I taste a lot of Bordeaux. There's an element that's not good or bad, but it has to do with earth that is not in this wine, even with the dust. Also, the stain, the alcohol, though that's changing. You know, I mean, the alcohol levels on Bordeaux is creeping up and up, but that ripeness that drives the wine, to me, is very much California. I think there's a roundness that speaks more to Sonoma. It's really beautifully classic Cabernet, though, Nick, I would have, even knowing what it is, it's 100% Cabernet Sauvignon, have surmised it might have a few other grapes tucked in it. And also it's low on the pyrazine level, but very pretty, floral, complete, delicious Cabernet that can handle food but doesn't really need it.
Great. Okay. So with that, we are at the end of our presentation. I just want to say a couple of things and then send people who need to leave off But like I said, we'll stay around to answer some more questions. If you're feeling overwhelmed after hearing all these very, you know, well-traveled, well-tasted individuals talk about wine, you are not alone. So for certain, you've got me and a lot of other people here. Keep it fun. Over time, you'll get more and more. And we really hope that you can share the love. We are a new startup. So please hashtag Master the World or join us on any of our social media channels at MTW Wines. We have a new site. It's crazy. We just launched, but we're having a new site. Our app is going to come out and our new coaching tool, different styles of learning for different types of coaches. And that's kind of where we're going with that as well. As you hear our coaches here talk about wines, you're going to find one style that suits you more. And then next, we have another webinar coming up on October 21st. And we still have summer shipping in effect. So we do charge a summer shipping, but very soon, some cities, as it cools down, are going to fall off that, and we do cover all of ground shipping.
Leeman, can I make a comment to the next, just because it's different? I think for many people, especially those who are experienced with Master of the World and have received a couple of kits before.
Not this kit, Evan. The peanut is much later. It's one more.
Okay. Can I still tease it anyway for down the road? I'm
Yes,
personally excited about it.
One.
Yeah,
Yes.
but we're just for the people that know, because I do get these questions a lot. People are sort of, I get asked, is this a typical kit? And this kit you have here is a typical kit, in that typically we will show upwards to 6 different varieties from 6 different provenances and 6 different styles, mix up the old world and the new world and do that. So in that regard, this is very classic. However, we have gotten asked, and because we listen to our customers, about, boy, wouldn't it be cool, Evan, if we could take a single variety and look at it in different provenances around the world. So not this next kit, but the kit afterwards is going to be our first endeavor in that direction. We will doing Pinot Noir, everybody's favorite grape, from all over the world. So there'll be Burgundy, there'll be a couple places in California, Oregon, etc. In that kit. I don't think I'm giving it all away ahead of time, but nevertheless, it'll be a micro study horizontally across one single grape because of the feedback we've received from you. That's all I wanted.
Absolutely. And I do want to go back to Elon's question. I feel very strongly that we made this kit so that consumers can enjoy some really good wines. We're going to put things in place to make it more fun for consumers. For starters, having webinars that are more friendly for consumer hour and talking more about food and wine pairing, which, you know, we do have one of those experts in the house who wrote books about food and wine pairing.
Perfect Pairings by E.G.
Exactly. All right. Well, don't feel bad if you have to leave. And if you don't have to leave, we will go ahead and answer some of the last few questions here. And we will have all the answers in I believe, Andrea, it's an Excel spreadsheet that goes out to everybody. So I'm going to work backwards. Brandon, hi, Brandon. Thank you for being such a huge supporter. And I know that you guys have been purchasing our kits from the get-go. Really appreciate it. Brendan asks, I think that was, Evan's wine. How would you distinguish between Côte Rôtie, Hermitage, Gros Hermitage?
Oh, well, I mean, first of all, from a purely geographical standpoint, the first 2 come from hillside vineyards, and Gros Hermitage generally comes from plains, the plains south and east of Hermitage proper. Those wines tend to have more concentration, more, I don't want to say depth and richness, but they're just bigger, bolder wines. And part of that is because hillsides stress vines more and the fruit comes off of them, and therefore the wines that are made tend to be more concentrated and higher volume. Oftentimes they have higher dry extract than you would get there. And the wines that come from the flatlands, it's very much like looking those that come off of the Napa Valley floor versus those that are coming from the hillsides. Those that are coming from the flatlands of Alexander Valley, where we were just at, as opposed to the north end of the valley where you're upwards at 1,800, 2,000 feet above sea level. Generally, mountain fruit will give you more stress, and those 2 areas are highly, by French standards, highly elevated vis-a-vis that. The other thing is yields. The yields, because of the mountain fruit and the definition of the appellations themselves by law, tend to be less hectoliters per hectare, or less yield per vine, per hectare, or whatever, and therefore you're going to get more concentration. The nature of the fruit tends to produce just, I don't mean to say it in a judgmental sort of way, but the wines are more complex than they would be from Creux Hermitage, although Creux Hermitage does, when well made, such as this example by Guy Gall, does give you all the signature flavors of Northern Rhone Syrah, but generally they're going to be softer. They're not going to be quite as don't want to say austere, but they're going to have more muscle to them, and where Creux is sort of like a little bit more training wheel zest, if you will, to those two big brothers and sisters.
Great. We have a question here about partial whole cluster and added stem inclusion. So just
Throw
for
it to
those of
Tim.
you who are looking at the fear of getting all geeked out, we're about to get really geeky, because during our sessions, imagine me as the moderator having to moderate between Evan, Madeline, and Tim, and them arguing about whether it's whole cluster or not and all that good stuff. So can somebody, I think Tim, I'm going to direct that at you, distinguish between partial whole cluster, added stem inclusion? Sometimes we just call it the Holy Trinity.
Yeah, well, again, all this has to do with the variations that a winemaker has at their disposal of fruit treatment, once it comes into the winery. So if you're using whole clusters, you probably are using stems, okay? And you may choose, in the case of Beaujolais or other wines made in a Nouveau style, you're using complete whole clusters, and by dint of that, you have stems. Okay. You can also destem and use, crushed fruit with, that's been destemmed, and you can add stems back in, but you probably wouldn't do that. And the reason you want to use whole cluster is you like the color that it draws out, but also the fruit quality. And so, there's all those options, but a wine can be made completely with whole clusters and stems, or partial. It really depends on what the winemaker is trying to do. And Nick Goldschmidt's listening to me and probably shaking his head. And Nick knows a lot more about that. Nick, that was an awesome Cabernet, by the way. So
Beautiful.
Great. Evan, we're going to go back to you on the Albarino questions. There are two. One is that are winemakers going out of their way to produce Albarino in the style that you're saying? More and more so. And the other question on Albarino was, would you call this Albarino an atypical style because it was so fruity?
Good pair of questions. If you look at it objectively and from a pure volumetric standpoint, wines like this are in the uber minority in the Minho. The lion's share of Vinho Verde that is still made today and sold globally is still added carbonation, a little bit of carbon dioxide, and are off dry. That's what most people want. They are getting drier, even in that sweet style, because people are sort of pushing back a little bit. But this genre of wines that you have today, that we had from the great Anselmo Mendes, who is one of the great winemakers of Portugal, forget just the Minho, I think is typical of a new direction that people are taking, specifically with Alvarinho as a mono variety, because if Alvarinho is blended with other grapes there locally, it's just Vinho Verde. But if it's made specifically from Alvarinho, aside from the fact that it has to come from specific places, it must be pure. And I think that to sort of counter that and demonstrate that wines can be made of gravitas and of quality from this grape, there is this movement. Mendes is one I mentioned, Soalero earlier is another one, Afros is another one, Quinto das Arcas is another one, but there's a number of people who are making this. I think this is, if nothing else, the leading edge of what potential and quality direction with Alvarinho is going today, as opposed to, those more commercial styled wines, which were frankly the only ones that were available in the past. And I think in that regard, although this style has been around, I believe Mendes' first vintage of this was in 1998. So it's been around for a couple decades, but nevertheless, I think as a style emerging, it's only been, in the last 8 to 10 years.
I'm going to go to the last question, and we do still have some more questions, but they will be answered when we send out. And the last question goes to Stacy. Thank you for staying on till now. Tim, I wanted to ask this question live because she's asking specifically about your inhale. So when you inhale the way you do, Tim, are you trying to perceive alcohol during that last inhale that you do before structure?
Well, it means, I'm not sure what she's at,
specific.
Stacy. Stacy, so when I smell wine like this, I use my technique I call active inhalation, which is you smell wine, you open your mouth and smell through your mouth and nose at the same time. So you're using a 10 and orthonasal, which is your nose, and retronasal, which is oral cavity. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is to check for alcohol. After I spit out the wine, I say, oh, and inhale. And then I get a real sense of, how much heat I'm feeling and sensing for alcohol.
Great.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, thank you guys so much. We really love and appreciate everyone being here and spending and giving us a little bit more time. And I hope you enjoy your wines. Check out our website. We have a lot of new things going in there. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much
for
for
your
joining,
company and your
everybody.
attention.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.